Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video, we're going to look at an interesting book. So, this is Two Roads by Joseph, and I swear I'm going to butcher his name throughout this month because we're pretty much covering a lot of his books. This is Joseph Bruchac. Okay, I'm mispronouncing it. I'm probably going to mispronounce it throughout again. Covering a bunch of his books. He's a Native American author. He writes quite a few books. In fact, this one's advertising. He's the author of Code Talker, which I think is more of an adult book. This is late elementary, middle school, maybe even high school age. It's in the children's section in the public library. So, despite the fact that, oddly enough, its main character, I think, is about 12. So normally this would be in teen. But it's a decent sized kids book. It's about, let's see, the full pages, 316 pages. Not bad. So late elementary, middle school, high school level. Again, depending on your kid's reading level. So this is a Native American story. It's very, very interesting. So what this book tells, it takes place in 1932. So you have Cal and his dad who were on the road. His father was a farmer. The depression happens, the crash, the bank took the home, took the farm and everything. His mother had previously died. She had been very sick. She was white. Dad, unbeknownst to Cal, is Creek Indian. So he's a Native American. So Dad was also a veteran. So he fought in World War I. So they're at the time, they're hobos. They are traveling around, jumping the trains, doing odd jobs. Cal's roughly, I think, about 13 in this book. The author talks a little bit about his age in the back. But I think, yeah, he's a young teenager in this book. So they'd been on the road for about a year. And his dad hears about what would essentially now be considered an Occupy Washington or a March on Washington. Now, event that's a protest that's going on. This happened. This was a thing. This happened in the summer of 1932 as Hoover was going up for re-election. This is probably one of the reasons he lost. Besides, the Great Depression was going on and everybody hated him because he wasn't doing diddly squat. So, in this story, you kind of go through the life of Cal with his dad, who, Cal, again, is not aware that his father is Native American. They are dark, but his mother was white. He was raised white. He was not aware that he was half Native American, or half Indian, as he's referred to. Again, this is 1932. So, he's not aware of this. His dad hears about this movement, of the veterans. This is what this was about. Hoover had promised veterans, basically guys who had fought during World War I, put their lives at risk, again, trench warfare, mustard gas, bonuses, essentially. He promised them money. And now that the Depression happened, they weren't getting it. So they were going to, large groups of them, again, this is a historical event, went and essentially set up camp on basically the Washington Mall, what we now know of as the Washington Mall, and essentially right in front of the White House. They were there to pressure him to fulfill his promises. Now, what I didn't realize, of course, there's information in the back of this book, this was July, he was up for re-election. So this was one of the things that pretty much kicked him out of office because he did inappropriate things. So Cal's father decides to go to this. Now his father realizes that this is dangerous. This is not someplace safe. This is not a place he wants his kid. So he reveals to Cal that he is an Indian. He is a Native American. And he went to one of the Indian schools. And the author completely makes up an Indian school, so it's completely fictionalized. This is a fictionalized story. But in the course of the story, his father says, I'm going to basically take you to this Indian school. Now, he had been sent there, and he had ran away twice, 3 times if you count him running away to the army, which he now knows the superintendent. So the school's not really a bad place. It's military discipline. They're not really allowed to speak their native language anymore. But his father kind of explains that it's not really the norm anymore. Most of the kids going there speak English. The native languages had really started to even die by now. Again, this is the 1930s. So a lot of them were from he's taking him to a school in Oklahoma, a school that his father went to. And he's deciding to take Cal there for him to go back to school, because he's been out of school since the farm died, the school closed because all the kids were gone. Parents were losing everything. So there weren't enough kids. So they closed the school down. And basically to allow Cal to be safe while his father went and essentially joined this bonus-like army. Because again, they were there to protest and force Hoover to give them their due, to fulfill his promise to veterans. So he takes Cal to this Indian school that he had gone to. Again, the superintendent has changed. He talks about different things that had happened since he was there. Now, there was a couple of different reports where there was horrible conditions. Again, this is historical fact. The author goes into some of this in the back of the book. And there were certain reports done, and the schools were cleaned up. They stopped trying to kill them, for one thing. They stopped pretty much beating them and starving them, and they had been badly run, and now particularly this school was better. So he's taking Cal there so he can go to school, he can learn. They also do trades. So he wants Cal to learn things. This is where his father would have learned farming and how to work with horses. So he takes Cal there, and he knows the superintendent. He's friends with him. I think the guy had been a previous teacher who was taken over. He was a nice guy. So, and this guy tells him, like, yeah, I don't count the 3rd time you ran away because you went away to the army. You were serving your country. So, and he enrolls Cal. It's kind of mid-semester. It's, I think, mid-spring. So it's an unusual time to start school, but it's when his father is going off to Washington, because again, his father is going to be doing this. A lot of the events have happened in summer. So this is about spring when he's taking them. So he drops Cal off, and Cal forms friendships. He becomes part of a different group of Creek Indian. He learns about native culture, which he didn't know, because again, his dad and his mom chose to raise him as white. And had the Depression not happened, he may have never known that he was native. So he learns a lot about the culture. You learn a little bit by reading this about how the kids bound together, how they supported each other in these schools. Yes, there was military discipline, but at this point, again, this is the 30s, things had changed. So, however, at one point, Cal has visions. So he sees things, particularly about his father's past, or things that could happen. And they do one of the sweat hut things there because he's having nightmares. And he sees that his father might die because the army is going to be sent to attack the camps. So he borrows a horse to get to a train, gets to Washington, finds his father. And you do see the events of what happened, where Hoover sent one of his generals, in this case MacArthur, known for some of what happens during World War II, with tanks to clear out essentially these protests. And Cal is there to rescue his father and basically say, we need to get out of here, because this is bad news. They're going to attack. And he's worried his dad's going to die. So he gets to his dad. He saves his dad. They get out. And they go back, and basically, at the end of the story, Cal realizes that his father still has a war to fight, essentially. and he's going to go back to the Indian school. Now, it is summer when he leaves. And so some kids at this point still go home to help their families during the summer. So it's not the way it was where they were sent there and they never saw their families again. Some of these kids go back. Some of his friends had gone back. So, and his father told him to stay put. So, however, it's kind of, Cal realizes he's going to go back to school. He's going to learn things. He's going to live that lifestyle. Why his father continues to fight. Now, again, Hoover would lose the election, which he was up for. Roosevelt takes over. We know the history because the New Deal happens, and Roosevelt's able to put a lot of people back to work. But that is this tale. In the back, the author does, and what's interesting is he talks about the history of the time period that he sets this in. He talks about the bonus army, which is what they were called when they were calling for their bonuses, these veterans. So, and kind of what happened and how and he kind of does a little bit of explanations, because it was common that natives who's had been sent to the Indian schools willingly sent their children to these boarding schools at this point in history because it was safe. In the book, they talk about how people are trying, if they have a drop of Indian blood in them, trying to get their kids into these Indian schools. During the Depression, you can understand because the government's paying for it. So essentially, they're sending their kids someplace where they can go to school, they can be housed, they can get fed. So by the time that this story takes place, at least half the kids are like Cal, who are not full native. And it does talk about why the parents would have sent them there, full Indians, half Indians, because there was community. What the white man thought to destroy couldn't. Not fully. They may have, the languages, particularly Native Americans back east, their languages are pretty much extinct. And I learned this from one of the youth librarians at the library system that I worked at, who was Native American. No, you could not tell by looking at him. He was very pale, but he was from the East Coast, and their languages are dead, as opposed to me, who's in the West Coast, where the native tribes here really rely on their native languages in some cases. So, but it talks about the history. So that's what's really interesting. This is a completely fictional tale. The author, again, is native. I can't believe, what is he exactly? The back of the book does not tell me. I think it was in one other book. But he is very well known. He writes a lot of books, both children's books and adult books, teen books, on Native American culture. That is his calling in life. He's also a poet. I'm covering him throughout the month, just partially because, oddly enough, it's easy. It's like he's a Native American author. All of his books are reliable because to cover during the month of November, I can trust him to relate the Native American experience authentically because he is one. So, really good book. Again, age range, late elementary and up, depending on reading level. You might want to read it. You could read it to younger kids. There's no real full-on violence in here, besides the mentioning of the tanks that happened. It's also very good. It's historical fiction, so it talks about a different side of the Indian schools that you don't see, because again, this is later. The Indian schools weren't officially shut down until the 70s. So, until they started more doing community schools near home rather than sending them away to these Indian schools. So, really fantastic book, particularly if you're looking at Native American history. And again, looking at the early part of the Great Depression and this culture and how the Indian schools had developed at this point in time. So, and also the life of hobos, who were not bums. And they have a code. It is real, according to the author, where they were honest. They were hardworking. They were just out of work and looking for anything to do to survive. They were willing to work. They were not bums sitting on the side of the road. So it looks at that native culture. It looks at that hobo culture. It looks at what's going on with different people during the height of the Great Depression, because again, 1932. So it is very, very good fictional book. So that's really it for this book review. If you like what you see, be sure to check out the rest of the channel. I'm covering several of his books. Last year I covered other Native American books. I try to stick to, when talking about Native American books, I try to highlight books written by actual Native Americans. Or in the case of a board book I did last year, Inuits. Yeah, the Alaskans aren't considered Native Americans. It's a strange classification. So, and I do that with most of my reviews when I do books or sometimes films. I try to, if I'm doing a minority, I try to find books written by said minority because they are the most authentic voice on this culture, on the ideal and the mindset. So be aware of that when you're checking out my channel. Otherwise, check out the rest of it. I do fun films. I do other fictional stuff. I did a bunch of Cinderella books this year for 2022. This is actually being filmed in December of 2021. So also be aware of that. A lot of my book reviews I do in advance because I can. And as far as I know, when I film them, those books are still available to be bought. They're still being published. I try to pick physical things as well. Big on the physical books when it comes to kids stuff. But be sure to check out the rest of the channel. I have a bunch of videos. Adults, kids. Try to keep it sometimes educational. We are a secular homeschooling family. So we are not religious. We homeschool for other reasons. I will be adding more of that stuff and how we explore things. By the time you guys see this video, my daughter is going to be 3. So we're still just touching on things. I'll also throw in a few travel videos. So, because we are, one of the reasons we choose to homeschool so we can travel. So when those come up, I will do videos on that. So be sure to like and subscribe, comment if you like. Thank you.